Good afternoon. I'm Steve Lowry, editor of the High Low. Today we're brought to you by California Census 2020. Today we'll be speaking about Pauley music director Andy Osman. Andy passed away September 4th. Andy was at the school for 36 years and built the music program into a nationally recognized powerhouse that won Grammys and traveled, did paying gigs. But we are here to talk about that, but also the man himself, who was, I think, without hyperbole, beloved. To do that, we have a colleague of Andy's, Brian Dokko. Brian, thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Brian is the head of the choral, what is the term, Brian?
Director of choral activities, choir teacher, simply put.
He's been there for 18 years. And we're also joined by Mike Guardabascio of the 562. Mike wrote a terrific appreciation that appears right now on the Long Beach Post and High Low. Mike, how you doing?
I'm good, Steve. How you doing?
Great. Brian, I want to start with you. The outpouring of feeling and emotion, not just since Andy's passing, but about a year and a half ago when Andy got the diagnosis that he had pancreatic cancer, has been tremendous. And it can't just be because he was a terrific music director and teacher. What was it about Andy that hit people so deeply that they feel his passing so deeply?
You know, it's really hard to put a label and to accurately describe it, because then I think it'd be easy to copy and emulate. I think that's what makes him really special and unique. The fact that he was a hard ass. He was demanding, but at the same time, incredibly personable, encouraging, supportive. And that's sometimes a rare balance in music, to have the combination that Andy had of just skill in terms of music and being a great educator in that respect, but also teaching life lessons through his rehearsals. Actually, one thing that sticks out to me is how many of his former students have invited him to his wedding. It's kind of a weird metric, but that really speaks a lot to the impact that he had on people's lives. The fact that years after graduating high school, possibly years after graduating college, they still felt his impact as basically a father figure, that they wanted him present at their weddings.
Mike, you have at least one student in your piece says, this is Mandy Wainfin?
Andy Wainfin, yeah.
Who says, he completely changed my life and so many others. How did he do that?
Well, I'll tell, I know Mandy is a sports writer because she was a cross country and track athlete at Pauley who ended up getting a scholarship and running on scholarship at UC Davis. But she told the story, she had a really nice Facebook tribute, which, as Brian will tell you, there's been like hundreds of those. But she said, she was really nervous for this big race. And her, she's telling Andy about it. Her family had known prior to her being at Pauley, but she's talking about being nervous, and he sort of stops her and goes, "Hey, I believe in you. You believe in you. This is someone who's teaching you as your orchestra teacher, getting you psyched up for, a cross country race that ends up being a race where she had a great mark and that got her scholarship to UC Davis." And I think I say this as someone, Brian knows education a lot more than me. I say this as someone who works around high school coaches and teachers, but not in that world. The way that you guys are, to me, what always really separates a teacher or a coach is someone who's willing to have a bigger impact than just what they do, what they do in their class. And I think it's obvious from the accolades and awards and everything that he was a great music teacher. But to me, when I hear stories from people that, like Brian said, like people wanted him at their wedding because they felt like it's not because he taught them to play the violin well, right? You want it because he helped make you who you were. And that's the kind of thing you're thinking about when you're getting married or when you're reflecting on how you got an athletic scholarship or something.
Brian, when you got the job at Pauley 18 years ago, did you already know of Andy by his reputation?
Andy was my main contact about the job. I was just freshly out of UCLA. I had taught 1 year in Santa Ana, and I was approached with the job opportunity. He's pretty well known. He's been in the festival circuits. He's been an adjudicator.
Was he? You mentioned that he was a great person, but he wasn't he was tough. What was he like to work with?
Um, I was his primary tech support, so my first impression, my first thought goes to he would always come call me to fix his printer or his computer. He was a joy to work with. He was never, despite the fact that he started teaching when I was 3 years old. I used to joke with him all the time to make him feel old, but I never felt like he was talking to me like my superior. He
Mm.
always talked to me, always talked to me as if we were on equal footing. And that was humbling for me because we are not on equal footing. Here's a man with, years and decades of experience and has proven success, but is talking to me as if my opinion matters just as much as his.
Mike, in your piece, you point out that the Poly music department that we know as this kind of powerhouse was certainly not like that. In fact, it wasn't like that so much that a kid straight out of college like Andy was just handed the music department. And in fact, I believe either the head of I think the principal or the head of the district, I can't remember which, basically said, and this is the quote, that the program was dismal.
Yeah, the way that Carl Cohn, who was a counselor at Poly way back in the day and then became the superintendent for quite a successful run, the way he recruited like a whole generation of people to Poly was he would personally interview them and say, this aspect of the school really sucks, and I need someone who will run it for like 40 years. And there's coaches, there's administrators, there's music teachers that sort of ended up coming into the school district that way. And yeah, that was his big pitch to Andy Osman was, you're coming out of college. You say you want to dedicate your life to a high school music program and really build it. I do think he was a special guy in that he knew at a young age that's what he wanted to do. And Carl was like, great, I've got just a high school for you. You're going to have kids who are the children of legendary jazz and reggae musicians, and you're going to have kids who are rich white kids from Bixby Knolls who've been classically trained on the piano since they were 2 years old. We're going to throw everyone together. And you'll have resources behind you, but yeah, that as we were talking about with Brian, I mean, there's just a couple classes when he gets there, and now you're talking about a program that gets up into the high 20s and 30s for just the different kinds of offerings, vocally, instrumentally, everything else that are at the school, and that quite literally has Grammy awards in the display case, actual Grammy awards. For being the best program in the country. And that's, as I tell people all the time, when you see successes at Poly, if you go walk around that campus, it's a miracle. I mean, it really is a miracle to see that kind of a success at an inner city school. And Carl Cohn has made the comment to me several times. He was the superintendent in San Diego after Long Beach. He said, if I told all the people in San Diego County, we're going to put your primary academic music and athletic magnet program in the heart of the inner city in San Diego, they would revolt, And instead at Poly, you can build a program like the music program there, or the sports program, or the academics, where you've got all these different kinds of people from all over the city coming together to make something really special. But you need the right kinds of teachers and people to put programs in place, which obviously Andy was one of those people.
I want to follow up on that. I'd like to just reach out to our viewers and listeners and let you know that please send us your comments, your memories, your questions for Brian and Mike about Andy and music program. Mike, I want to go back to that. Another amazing thing about your piece is everyone talks about the Long Beach Municipal Band being the oldest band in the country. But the point is the Poly music program actually predates the municipal band.
Yeah.
So it has been well thought of, but it had kind of, can you give us a little of the history of the program at Poly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fun. I've written a book on the history of the school, and it's fun when you do research at Poly because you just find literally behind display cases like banners, national championship marching band banners from like 1904 and stuff, right? But the school actually predates the city. Long Beach was officially incorporated in 1897, and Poly opened its doors in 1895. So the bands and music programs there had won. I mean, I was shocked at they're in some of the trophy cases on the campus. Brian's probably seen them. There's these huge trophies and these things that, it looks like the Holy Grail or something. You'd have to scrub quite a bit of lime off of them or whatever to see even what year they're from. But then, like a lot of the Long Beach public schools, but particularly Polly and Jordan, went through some tough times in the late 60s and early 70s. And when he took over the music program in the early 80s, the academic and athletic turnaround had started at the school, but it had not really reached the performing arts programs yet. They had won a football championship again. They had the academic magnet programs were rolling, but they needed that spark to kind of kick off the performing arts, which I think Carl and Andy was a very humble guy, but I think he even admitted when we were interviewing him for the book that his hiring sort of signaled that commitment to getting that side of things going. And it's, because of people like Brian and people like Chris Stevens and Julia Gustafson, like it's basically been an uninterrupted 36-year, kind of a dynasty of a program. It's incredible.
Brian, can you, I don't know if you ever talked to Andy, do you have a plan? Or did he just kind of make it up as he went along? Brian?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. I was.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Have you ever talked to Andy about how he went about remaking the program? Like, was it something that he had an overarching plan about, or was this kind of just something he made it up as he went along?
That was his first job coming out of UCLA. He was 22, 23 with that massive beard. I remember from his his freshman year at Poly. I don't know the full details of that, but I know his philosophy has always been surround yourself with good people. So I know that he spent time. It was a priority to make sure that he could encourage the people that that could do the job.
Yeah.
So back when he started, there was just I think it was just him and one music teacher, and at our peak, we had 4 separate music teachers.
Brian, working with him, did that overall affect you and your teaching style? Are some of the things you do because of Andy?
Yeah, I think so. I know, I'm in my 18th year teaching, and it feels like I know what I'm doing, but I think if you ask any experienced teacher, you're always trying to evolve and adapt. So I think in watching Andy work with the students and just knowing the rapport he had with his kids, I think that definitely influenced, especially in the full package that Andy was. Andy was, an awesome music teacher. For a lot of kids, he was a father figure. He was a coach. He was a counselor in a lot of respects, a technician, an instrument repairman. He just did it all. So yeah, I think definitely there's sides of his teaching style that I've absorbed since. And that's why I never really felt like I was his peer. Even though he treated me like that, I always felt like you're still my mentor,
When when he made the announcement that he was going to have to retire immediately to fight pancreatic cancer, in the year and a half left of his life, Brian, did you have a lot of contact with him, or was he busy trying to take care of his health?
In talking with Maureen, we were reflecting. We did a little social distance hang in the backyard on Andy's 60th birthday last Wednesday, just to kind of toast Andy. And we were both agreeing that he made cancer look easy. Those are Maureen's words. Obviously that's kind of take that with a grain of salt, but we played a couple rounds of golf. I know he went skiing a few times. One silver lining was with some of the treatments and the steroids, it had alleviated some of his allergies, because he was basically a vegetarian for most of the time I knew him. But through this, he was able to enjoy, some of the foods he hadn't had in a decade. So we're really grateful that his quality of life was such that he really did it well. He really got to enjoy some extra time.
And you were able to, Brian, do something that was, according to Mike, almost unprecedented, which was you helped spearhead the effort to rename the Performing Arts Auditorium for Andy. Can you talk to us about how you first got the idea for that and how you went about doing that?
Well, the idea came pretty quickly. The second we heard that Andy was retiring, and then for the circumstances, we immediately thought, this is what we're going to do. I mean, I don't think there was much discussion, even with site administration. They were like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Of course, you're going to name the auditorium after the man who built that program. So yeah, we fast-tracked that thing and got it up on the side of the auditorium in about 2.5 months. And the way that happened was some rather quick and aggressive fundraising, which came in. It's amazing how quick money came in, just because, and that just goes to show how beloved he was. And you know, I ran that thing through the district. We got it on a board approval, and then I didn't take any prisoners. You know, me and our little team of people that were in charge of that, we rammed it through.
And just to give a sense of how unprecedented that is, I mean, there are things currently pending that have been like approved by the school board to be renamed for people, you know, months ago that still have not been renamed. Remarkable by the team to push it through, and also the school district, I think, to understand that we'd be really dumb to hold this up, you know. And I mean, you had NPR, you had, you know, national organizations that came out to cover that dedication ceremony because of the impact that he's had. And yeah, to me, as a weird side effect of my job, I write quite a few obituaries every year about, you know, friends of mine or people that I knew or people that I covered. And to me, it's always easier to write a final chapter for someone when you knew that they got those flowers while they were around to smell them, you know, and you knew that he had that chance to, and he talked about that a lot, you know. I mean, I think he probably heard from every kid he ever taught, you know, over the last year and a half. And I to me, I really commend Brian and everyone else for getting that done, because I think that it's special when that happens. I think everyone deserves for that to happen at, you know, in their life. And, you know, frankly, just most people don't get that. So,
and that's what Andy said. His own words were, I got to attend my own wake. Who gets to do that? Those are his words. You know, all of us knew that. All of us knew going into that memorial ceremony in June of 2019, we knew that this was his living wake, our way to say thanks. And, you know, he really treasured that. You know, he told me afterwards, it's like it didn't sink in until he was leaving. He got in his car and Maureen drove him home, and as he drove by and he saw the letters on the auditorium wall from afar, he started to cry, because that's when it hit him.
Right.
You know, but that was his, one of his big things to be grateful for, that despite all this, you know, how many people get to see that while you're still around? It almost always happens, you know, at a funeral.
well,
Yeah.
and I feel like especially teachers, I mean, you're in public service, but you have such a great relationship with these kids, and then they go off, right? I mean, they go off into the world, and you don't, unless you have a retirement party or a ceremony like that, I mean, there's just not even a way to receive all that love. I did want to give a little bit of extra context as someone who knows the history of the school pretty well. Having something named after you at that school is a very rare and a pretty big deal. I mean, as far as I know, that building is the only thing named after someone at Poly that you can see from off the campus. But the only other people who have things named for them there are David Burcham, who is the principal for like 40 years, Tony Gwynn, Billie Jean King, and there are two other principals who have a Hall of Fame and a library named after him. I think that's it. You know, I mean, I don't know that there's any teacher other than him that has something named for him. There are 70 NFL players and 25 Major League Baseball players and 10 NBA players who do not have anything named after them. The gym is also named after Ron Palmer, the coach. But I mean, that's it, really. You know, so over 125 years, you think of all of the history that's gone through there. That's, I don't know, that's really remarkable. I think that was a great tribute as well.
Brian, when you said that he teared up when he saw his name, I know it's not because he said, oh, look, I'm a big deal, because in Mike's story, he must have been a bit of a pain in the ass with this. But Mike points out that all the money you were getting to put his name up there, he kept saying, no, give that to kids to buy instruments, right?
He initially did not want us to do it, but he understood that in a lot of ways, it was more for us than it was for him. It wasn't about him getting his due, his credit, his praise. It was for our hearts to be able to say thank you. And for me, as someone that's still at Poly, I think it's important that people know who built that program, so that when you walk into AOPAC, Andy Osman Performing Arts Center, when you walk in there, you know, already we have kids that don't know who he is. And I love telling this story. Well, let me tell you about Andy, you know?
What do you say, Brian, when you say, let me tell you about Andy? What's the thumbnail you give them?
Well, I tell them this overarching concept of this is the educator that built the program that you get to reap the benefits of. You get to have jazz bands, you get to have jazz choirs, you get to have classical groups of all sizes, chamber sizes. You have all these options that most high schools don't get. And the reason you have it is because of that Andy Osman.
Mm. We were talking before that, you know, there's a well-known term, a band geek, and the thinking that if you're in music at a high school, you're the lower echelon. Mike points out in his piece that maybe because of Andy, a band member has the same standing as an athlete. And as we know, athletics at Poly are do pretty well. What, either of you can answer this, what is it like to be a musician on the Poly campus?
Well, I don't know if we'd get as much credit as, say, our NFL-bound football players, but
Okay.
we have very few. I think we only have 1 or 2 out of 26, 27 music courses, only 1 or 2 that are audition free. So every other ensemble requires you to have had some time on your instrument to have proven yourself, in a sense. So there is definitely a bit of, that's the music program that's hard to break into. There's a little bit of eliteness to it, and not eliteness. We're not trying to encourage, you know, snobbery or anything like that, but you know, it's built up to a point where we can cultivate that kind of talent.
They don't hand you varsity spots on the football team at that school, and they don't invite you into the jazz ensemble either, right? It's all kind of proven. I would add that I spent 4 years at an orchestra there that was audition free. I was in the lesser orchestra, which I joked with Andy about several times over the years. Music was not something I was passionate about. I was just sort of playing violin for the, you know, because people told me it would get me into UCLA or whatever to have the elective, which did not work out, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it is like the audition process. I mean, whether you're a 9th grader or a 12th grader, like you don't get moved into the better orchestras unless you go in at lunch, you know, or whatever to play for Andy and show that you actually know what you're doing. And he gives you some, you know, at that time, at least he'd put some stuff in front of you that you didn't know how to play and say, you've never seen it before, you know, you're sight reading it, play it, you know? And I think that's kind of a unique thing too. I mean, these programs weren't just experiential, like, oh, we want to have a lot of programs so a lot of kids can do stuff. Like, you're really developing people and trying to make something that was good, which is why I think it's such a cool thing in Long Beach that if you've ever been down on 2nd Street around the holidays, if you're ever at a holiday party, like you've probably seen a Poly or a Wilson, you know, a choir or a jazz group or an orchestra. Like, it's just a very cool part of the musical culture of this city that kids have that available to them, and that we as adults have it available to listen to as well.
We've got a comment from Facebook. Thanks for doing this, sharing these memories of Andy. I truly would not be the person that I am today had it not been for his immeasurable impact on my teenage years. If you're not from Long Beach, you just can't fully understand what a special place Poly High is. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time there with Andy as a student and again later on in life. And I imagine, Brian, you heard comments like that over and over and over the past year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Facebook group, Students of Mr. Osman, and stories, pictures, the outpouring has been, you know, inspiring. You know, this is kind of dark, but a lot of times I approach my students, it's like, what are people going to say at your funeral? What kind of life will you have lived? What kind of impact will you have had? So it's a little dark, but you know, it puts things into proper perspective. It's like, live a life that mattered. And as you see, the thousands, literally thousands of students that are saying what an impact he had, not just, oh, he taught me how to play faster, or he taught me how to use my bow. You know, sure, he did all that stuff, but you know, that's what the full package of Andy Osman was. The fact that he was excellent in music. I mean, top awards. Just as an aside, I always thought it was amusing when I first got to Poly and I met Andy, all their trophies were up on the shelf, just jammed into a corner. They had hundreds of trophies, but they didn't really care. It wasn't about that for them. It's like, yeah, we're great, we're awesome, but let's talk about the process and how this is changing us as human beings. So,
Mike, you touch on that in your piece. I think he says something like, yeah, I'm not a trophy guy.
Well, yeah, Brian will appreciate this story. So Tyler Hendrickson, who works with us at the 562 and co-wrote the Poly book with me, we had our appointed day that we're going to go talk to Chris Stevens, who's the jazz and marching band guy at Poly, and Andy. We're going to talk to him for an hour each, right? Set it up. They said, yeah, we can both stick around here. And this was, I mean, we interviewed him only a few months before his diagnosis too. So, I mean, this was very recently. And of course, you know, we're setting up the photos and we go, do you guys have the Grammys around? I mean, can we get the Grammys out and get some pictures? And, you know, we're talking to Andy and he like yells back into Chris's office. He's like, Chris, do we have the Grammys? Like, just like, and one of them, it was like, I think a kid had thrown it and it was broken. And these are literal Grammys. I mean, it's the, you know, I mean, they're heavy. It's the actual award that, you know, the program got 2 times for being the best high school program in the country. And I think 6 Grammys and 2 signature, like the actual trophies or something. So yeah, I mean, it was just, but it was so funny. Tyler and I are laughing. It's like, that's the attitude is like, yeah, the trophies are around here somewhere, guys. You know, who cares?
Hey, Brian, losing Andy would be difficult, personally, obviously, but also difficult for the program under any circumstance. Given that right now you are trying to teach music on a Zoom call, what is the program going to be like going forward? Has Andy been replaced? What kind of stewardship is it? Like, how are you guys set up to move forward without Andy being there now?
So Andy retired June of 2019, and we were fortunate in being able to hire a replacement and having a choice in it. I'm sure you know with districts, sometimes it's all about seniority, but we were able to interview for that basically. So we've got an awesome director in there, a good friend of mine too, Ron Scipio. It's just been a perfect storm in terms of how difficult it is because Andy retired and then we went virtual. It just feels like there's a lot of things stacked up against us. But I think one real true measure of Andy's legacy is how confident I feel that his work is going to survive all these bumps of transitioning to a new director and COVID and distance learning. Just the foundation is so strong. I don't think, sure, we might have a little bumps here and there, but I think we're going to be fine. Actually, I know we're going to be fine.
I know you are your own person. Just in the year and a half, Brian, do you find yourself when you come to kind of little professional forks in the road, do you ever think like, well, what would Andy do maybe here?
Of course. Yeah. You know, we all relied on his experience. And one thing we didn't talk about was how much of an advocate he was, not just for the students, but for us as colleagues too. And he was, you know, really vociferously about defending our positions, defending our programs. But, you know, one thing that lasts always is the fact that he would always say students first. If it doesn't help the students, we're not going to do it. He would always say that. That's why he didn't want money being spent on the auditorium. He said, put it in the scholarship account. So yeah, I think that students first thing is something that's always going to be with us. Mike,
you wanted to say something?
Oh, I was just going to basically ask Brian to say what he just said. He mentioned when we did the interview for the story that, you know, Steve, if you've been reading the Long Beach Post education coverage, you know, like this has been a fairly tumultuous time for students and also teachers and parents and, you know, everything in the district. And that was something Brian mentioned to me that I thought was great. Like I probably heard from a dozen or so people who taught at Poly that they'd gotten a lunch with Andy or they'd gotten breakfast with him over the last year and a half. And I was really impressed with, he retired, not, you know, abruptly, certainly not the way he would have wanted to have done it. And like almost immediately transitioned into like a Godfather role, it sounds like, where, you know, just like, you know, people are going to him for advice. And I think it sounded from what Brian told me, like he kind of helped keep you guys focused on, hey, you know, you might think that the school district is doing something stupid here, or hey, you might have these issues that are coming up for you guys, but remember that you're going to have kids in the class and it's just as hard for the kids, and that's who you're there for, which, you know, to me, that's a really incredibly admirable mentality to maintain, you know, even as you're going through everything that he was going through.
We're going to leave it there. I wanted to ask you, Brian, before we go, can people go on YouTube and see some of Andy's orchestras performing? Are there videos available?
There are some. Andy was kind of a dinosaur in that respect. So now that Ron, who's a little bit younger, he's trying to get us more hip on the website thing. But
Okay.
yeah, that stuff's coming. I did want to say just one more thing about kind of just Andy's lasting legacy. A lot of people have put these things out saying a light has gone out in the world, something like that. But I've actually rebutted that. It's like, actually, I think the opposite is true. I think with his passing, the light he's put into all of us has now been amplified, because now we know what it means to be someone of impact, and we want to pay that forward. So that's something that's been kind of giving me encouragement. It's like, he's not gone. And in fact, his legacy is not diminished in any respect. And if anything, it is strengthened, because now that we know how to, value things and value really great teachers, I think it inspires all of us to just carry that on.
Thanks for that, Brian. Thanks for being here. Mike, thank you. Read Mike's piece on